Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I'm your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by King Newbie and Giant Deathbag. It's Matt Freeman.
Get out. Fuck off. Beat it.
This week, we are chatting about chapters 23 through 25 of Insomnia. Ralph and Lois head to the convention center, be a little bit racist, and then follow the trail of Atropos into his spooky tree lair. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
I mean, this is kind of an unusual kind of between plot beats bit of reading, but definitely interesting and surprising in many ways. I mean, we're going to get to it, but I would not have predicted that there would be a diversion from what I saw as the main sort of through line, which was stopping the convention center speech from happening to go into a evil, spooky ogre tree to try to get the One Ring.
Yeah. I do think that's what's most interesting about this book when you really break down the plot beats is it's constantly changing what it is. And it always kind of surprises you because I agree. Like if you look at the way last week's reading ended up, I don't think you ever thought we'd end where we end this week. But it's just like that's King to me in a lot of ways, that he's just like, here's what we're going to do. And this is what feels like it's right for the next part of the story. So we're going to zig here and zag there. And suddenly you're at the bottom of a tree covered in a cave of money, slicing into a death bag with hand scissors to find a ring. It's really, really wild. And I think a lot of people, the weirdness is almost too much for them. And I think like the Dark Tower gets into this level of weirdness a few times throughout the course of it. But this book is unique in the places it goes for sure. Yeah.
It's definitely, this is one book where I feel like every evolution of the plot has been a complete surprise to me and continues to be so.
Yeah. I wonder if you just send yourself back in time to where you were when you first started this book, if you thought any of what has happened over the last couple weeks was even a remote possibility.
At some point, it'll be fun to go back and listen to the podcast and be like, oh yeah, I thought that was what was going on. Wow, that was way off base.
It's so wild that like at this point in the book, like the existence of the little bald doctors is like tame compared to everything else that's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Little bald doctors. Yeah, that's I think that's what's funny about the craziness that King is able to build is like he introduces one element and you're like, that's wacky. And then like a couple pages later, you've sort of taken it for granted. And then he just ramifies and elaborates. And then you've got like, we've talked about it before, but you've got a robot train telling them riddles. And you're just like, yeah.
Yeah, I know we're repeating ourselves now, but I will never be able to get over the idea that King crafts these stories in such a way that you just roll with any punch he gives you. Like it's just like, okay, sure, I'm on board. I'm on board for Riddle Train. I'm on board for bald evil doctor living in a old tree. Yeah. Like I'm on board for all of it.
Right. I mean, I think in this book, he took the time to patiently set up Ralph as a character, and that's why we're willing to go with him on this ride.
I think it's so interesting because I've been reading a lot about this book just in the world, and I've been reading a lot of what constant readers and not as constant readers say about this book. And one of the biggest criticisms I've seen is the fact that the book starts off very, very slow, which is, it's not something I disagree with, but I'm just like, I look at the last third of this book and I look at it. If you didn't have the first third that took the time to set everything up and take its time with the characters, I think the last third would just lose you completely. And I think King innately understands that. And so what someone else calls slow, I call extremely necessary.
Yeah. And I just really enjoy the sort of tension of wondering what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
That's enjoyable to me. I don't want it to be, prematurely blown.
Sure. All right, before we get into our discussion this week, we just had one quick announcement. Many of you have been very patiently waiting for this, and we really appreciate your patience. But the final round of voting for our first Do the King thing writing contest is now live. Again, we apologize for the amount of time it's taken to set all this up, and we thank you for your patience in waiting for that to happen. But we have our 6 finalists that are up against each other head to head in this final vote now. So if you are a patron of Doof Media, you can head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia, find that poll. It will also be linked in the show notes here, and vote on which of the stories you think is your favorite. So we will crown a winner and a runner-up and a third place based off of that final set of votes. And then we will figure out how to do this thing a little more efficiently and better and more organized next time.
Yeah. We've run a bunch of contests over the course of the whole Doof Media project. We've never had 39 submissions for anything. So
yeah, it really just threw us for a loop on everything. Like we solved one problem and then encountered another one. Like we finally got to the point where like how we're going to handle the number of stories we have, and we're like, okay, finally we're in a good place. And then that initial vote ended, and we looked at how the vote on all landed, and we were like, okay, now what do we do?
Yeah.
What do we do now? So it's definitely been a learning experience for us. We will still crown a winner, and we will read those stories in a very special episode of this podcast that you will see hopefully within the next few weeks. But thank you again. And just overall, Matt and I have read every single one of the stories that you guys submitted, and they're really good. They're like even we had to, someone has to win, right? This is the way contests work. There had to be a winner. But from top to bottom, I think every one of these stories was really good, really fun. The ways in which people channeled King, either directly and not so subtly, or they tried to do it subtly, I thought was just delightful. Like I just laughed every time I saw either an overt reference or a subtle reference. It was really, really fun reading these. So thank you to everyone who participated, and we promise we will get this. We will do better next time with this, because there will be a next time. We're definitely going to do this again.
Yeah, we will do better, and I hope everybody had fun, because we sure had fun reading them, and it sounds like y'all had fun.
So. Yeah. So yeah, patrons, make sure you read those 6 stories and vote on your favorite. And if you're not a patron, now is the time, because you get to read 6 incredible stories and pick which one is your favorite. So it's a great time to do that. You can head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia, and at any level you can participate in the vote and read the stories right now.
That's right.
All right, Matt, enough of that stuff. Let's get into the chapters. We begin this week with chapter 23. And our chapter begins with us immediately learning that Joe Weiser isn't on some grand conspiracy, isn't part of some grand plot, isn't as insidious as you believed him to be all those pages ago. He was just a dude that Door asked for a ride out here and has no idea what's going on.
Yeah. So whoopsie. But I mean, it's the opposite. He's being puppeteered. He's not even like aware that he's here, right?
Yeah.
But I think the purpose of his presence really is to give us the opportunity for Door to bring up the comb. And by implication, the earrings.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you look at what gets Ralph and Lois into the tree layer, it is Joe Weiser being here. It's like, if you're looking at what the purpose, capital P purpose of Joe Weiser's inclusion in the story, that is it. That is his plot purpose for sure.
Yeah, I like that.
But of course, all Door wants to do is talk about poetry, Matt, because, well, maybe he's just Stephen King. Maybe that's who Dorrance is. He's just Stephen King. But old Door here name drops like 4 poets in rapid succession. Stephen Dobbins, who we've already talked about. But here he also mentions Hart Crane and Stephen Crane, both Americans, and then the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. There's an interesting little factoid here. Both of the Cranes that are mentioned here died young. Hart Crane died of suicide when he was only 32, and Stephen Crane died of tuberculosis at 28 years old. I don't know if King specifically mentions them here for that purpose, but it is an interesting thing to note in a story about both death and old age, that here we have 2 poets that died without reaching that old age. Neither poet made it to that old age. Also, Dylan Thomas, the Welsh poet, died before he was 40. So not quite young, but not old either.
Yeah. Not just, they didn't just die. I mean, so they died random, pointless, senseless deaths. You could say that they died in the random. You could argue, And it makes me think about all these artists who died too young, and wonder if, like, is Atropos running around slashing balloon strings of all these young vibrant artists because he's that much of an asshole.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think, just to tie that theme in here, there could be this idea that Atropos is responsible for all these tragic deaths. I don't know.
Yeah, I like that. And of course, I think that fits in really nicely with, like, we learn the significance of Atropos's existence here later in the final chapter of this week. So I think you're right there.
Yeah.
But seriously though, why Joe Weiser specifically? Why was this band tapped to do this thing? Well, of course, Matt, it's a coincidence. Dorrance says, we are bound together by the purpose. That's quartet, which means one made of many. The way that many rhymes make up a single poem, you see? So this is the most direct Dark Tower reference we've had outside of the name drop of the Crimson King himself. I think it's really interesting because obviously you have a book like Salem's Lot, which has a quartet but doesn't name it. And then you have a book like Insomnia, which also has a quartet, of course, because like every King book does. But in this book, because our references are more direct, because we are a book that is very close to the tower itself, we use the name here.
Yeah, right. And it's funny because the element of Roland's quartet being able to communicate telepathically was sort of a minor but persistent fact of their quartet, whereas the telepathy of this quartet is extremely front and center, and
True.
the centered to the nature of their powers and so forth. So it's yet another one of those fun connections where it's like maybe this is sort of the sort of thing that Roland and his quartet are doing. They just don't have it on the same degree where they can actually see the auras and stuff. I don't know.
I like
fun.
that.
It's fun to think about, though.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think? I guess, what is your preferred method in these other levels of the tower books? Do you prefer it in a Salem's Lot way where it's obvious that he's gesturing towards the same metaphysical thing? Or do you prefer the Insomnia way where we're making that gesture textual by using the same words and the same language that was inundated within the Dark Tower series itself?
Well, I guess I'll say that if it turns out that we read a whole bunch of these and there's a whole bunch of on the nose Dark Tower references, at a certain point I might become like bored of that. I don't know. Whereas when it's more subtle and in the background and thematic, that's more fun for me, because then I can kind of be like, oh, is that? Oh yeah, it's quartet, yes. Mm-hmm. Or somebody mentions like, we just talked about this in other levels of the tower when we talked about the Shawshank Redemption. The idea that at one point Andy Dufresne says like, I feel like there's a tornado that carried me away, or something like that. And he doesn't say "ka" like a wind, but the maybe it's not an overt reference, but it's thematically close enough to what I think of as "ka" that I kind of got excited and was like, oh, it's ka again. And that's that's not a Dark Tower reference, but that's something that I can see as a connecting theme throughout King's works, right? So that's the kind of thing I get really excited about.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And thank you for reminding me of the other announcement I forgot to make at the beginning of the show, which is this week we have a new Other Levels of the Tower episode out that will be out by the time you're listening to this. So that's on the Shawshank Redemption, patreon.com/doofmedia. Hey. Yeah. Anyway, I think I prefer, if our choice here is a binary between the Salem's Lot way or the Insomnia way, which so far that is our only choice because we're only 2 books into this thing, I think I prefer the Salem's Lot way a little bit more. I've had more fun reading and talking about this book with you than I did Salem's Lot, for all the reasons we talked about when we were covering that book. But I do prefer the books that gesture towards the Stephen King multiverse rather than like textually exist within it. I just think it is more fun to see like these themes and these ideas and these machinations that exist throughout the Towerverse, but aren't like specifically textually like, this is a dark tower. This is here.
Mhm.
There is a vision of the dark tower. There is the Crimson King. We are Katet. Like, I don't know. I think this stuff is fun, and I actually think this book confuses it in a lot of ways by referencing it in ways that aren't consistent with the rest of the Dark Tower. But I think I do prefer the Salem's Lot way, where you're just like, you're looking at the powerful group friendship developing between these characters, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, that's a Katet. Than having a character just say, hey, look, this is a Katet. I think I do. Not that I don't like this book, and I'm still having fun going through the Ka of it all with you, but I don't know. When King is less directly connecting things, I tend to enjoy it more.
Yeah, I'm not categorically averse to referential fan service, but I prefer that it be subtle and more of an Easter egg, I guess, is what I'll say.
Yeah, that's fair. So they're kind of talking about what's going to happen now, and Lois has convinced herself that after the events of High Ridge, the rally will absolutely be canceled tonight. But after talking with Helen, Ralph knows better, and we get this wonderful quote that I think lines up with exactly what we were talking about last week. It was no longer just about the choice and who had the right to decide what a woman did with her own body. Now it was about causes important enough to die for and honoring the friends who had done just that. Now they were talking not just about politics, but about a kind of secular requiem mass for the dead. I think that really falls in line with exactly the frustrations that we were airing at the end of last week's episode.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it seems like the shootings at High Ridge made Ralph and Lois's job of stopping the rally even more difficult, because now everyone is just doubling down.
And I think we'll circle back around to this when we talk about what the purpose of them going out to High Ridge was. But it's interesting that like they were told to go out there to try to stop the rally, and you're right. It now it's harder to now. Like, I think, in fact, what Dorr says is, done bun can't be undone, right? Like, the rally is going to go on tonight for sure. And old Dorr is basically like, getting Susan Day to cancel her appearance won't actually stop the rally from happening at this point. People will still show up even if Susan Day is not speaking. They'll be coming no matter what. So what the hell, what the hell are they supposed to do now? Right.
Yeah. Right. It makes it more logical that they sort of seem to abandon what their initial plan was, because, you know, that their initial plan was along the lines of like calling a bomb threat or find Susan Day directly. And now they've realized like we have to rethink our whole approach. And I think that's why they end up just tracking down Atropos. Yeah.
I think you're right. I love this line where Ralph just kind of breaks down and like finally tries to get Dorrance to actually answer a question. And he says, "What's it all about, Alfie? Why are we here?" Dorrance's grin had faded at last. With it gone, he looked younger and strangely formidable. Job asked God the same question, he said, and got no answer. You're not going to get one either, but I'll tell you this much. You've become the pivot point of great events and vast forces. The work of the higher universe has almost completely come to a stop as those of both the random and the purpose turn to mark your progress. I love this, but using Job there is such an interesting choice, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's bad. It's a bad omen, I guess, for poor Ralph. I mean,
yeah, this is one of those moments that like I don't know how, like, our listeners are vast and from many different backgrounds. So I feel like Job is one of those books of the Bible that most people know like tangentially, even if they haven't read the Bible or didn't grow up religious or anything. It's just like one of the popular pop culture books of the Bible, which is weird to say, but I mean, you agree, right? I think most people know the story of Job vaguely, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, but which is it's not that it's a simple story, but I think the applicable aspect of why this is a unsettling comparison to make is that it's basically about God seeing how horribly he can torture a single man before the man abandons his faith or breaks in some way.
That's a very harsh interpretation of it, but yes, essentially, like basically, God and Satan are having a chat, and God is like, "Hey, look, this guy is super faithful to me. Isn't that awesome?" And Satan goes, "That's only because he's like super rich and his life is perfect and stuff. If you take that shit away, he would lose his faith in you completely." And God goes, "Nah."
Yeah.
And so to prove his point, he does it. And he, over the course of the book, just completely rips everything away from Job and destroys his life and like like rips him down to nothing, takes everything away from him. And Job, of course, remains faithful to God. And the lesson here is that the lesson is supposed to be, it's supposed to do two things. I think one of the things is supposed to be a way to biblically explain why bad things happen to good people, but also to show that faith is attached to something deeper than the material or even the just like the state of life on this realm of existence.
Mm-hmm. There's also the element where Job asks, like why did you do this to me? And God is like, don't ask me questions. Don't ask me silly questions. I won't play silly games.
Exactly. I mean, he is playing a rather silly game. But it's not a, I think Doerr's doing that on purpose, right? That like, look, Ralph, like, I'm not going to give you a satisfying answer. And also this is going to be rough on you. So just get ready for it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, does this imply that he's going to lose Lois? Because that would be the next thing I would expect to happen if Ralph were literally a Job in the story. So. Yeah,
I mean, certainly on the possibilities list for sure.
Just while we're talking about like the Bible is in some sense parables too. So like the idea of Job, like so connecting the idea of like the elderly with Job, it's like, doesn't every elderly person probably feel like Job at some point where they're like, Jesus, what else are you going to take from me? Like,
I think
like
so.
Their body's falling apart, their mind's falling apart, all their friends are dying. They're like they're just losing everything. And it's like, that's kind of a horrible truth of the world, is like, just as you get older, you are just naturally put through an ordeal that is comparable with this character in the Bible, who has an almost caricatured process of loss.
Yeah, for sure. And this is a lot of heavy lifting the Bible's having to do here, right? Because like, at least the Greeks, you could be like, well, I understand why the gods are pieces of shit and all this terrible stuff happens. But like with Christianity and the Christian God, at least of the New Testament, it is difficult to understand why all this bad stuff happens to us. And I think Job is an attempt to reckon with that. And I think depending on, the level of your faith, you find that answer more or less satisfying. I don't want to turn this into like a Christianity podcast. It's just King kind of keeps forcing us to go back to this, but I do think it is ultimately not a satisfying answer for Ralph, but I understand the universality of that feeling for sure. Yeah,
it's interesting to think about. I think that's the question or the idea is called theodicy, I believe is how it's said. I'm not sure. The idea of like, how is there evil when there's a God? There's a fun answer to this question, which is that God has created every possible universe in order to maximize the amount of good, and a lot of evil gets created along the way because it wouldn't be every possible universe if it didn't include the universes that also have evil, which works.
It's such a Matt version of getting to the bottom of that answer.
It is a Matt version, but doesn't it also work perfectly well with the Dark Tower, which is about multiverses?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yes.
if every possible version of existence is out there, then there has to be one where like a lot of bad stuff happens and like a medium amount of bad stuff happens.
Yeah. Or there's only one good thing that ever happened in that universe, but it still had to be created.
Man, that's I mean, I don't think that's our universe, but fingers crossed.
I think our universe is one of the middle ones.
Yeah, I think it, statistically we would be just right there in the middle ground. Yeah.
We're in one of the universes that has death. So, yeah.
So did you want to talk about Old Door here a bit? Because I think this is an opportunity to kind of talk about who this guy is or what we think this guy is, because the book, I kind of left this open last week as a way of, not telling you whether or not they were going to really fill in more information on who this is. But it seems like he's walked out of the story again here at the end of the scene, and we didn't really learn much more about him. So who is Old Door?
Well, longtime listener and all around great guy Spinagon mentioned the idea that Dor is Tom Bombadil. So it's Tom Bombadil. Although it can't be Tom Bombadil, obviously, because Brown from the Gunslinger is already Tom Bombadil.
Yeah, because there could not possibly be more than one Tom Bombadil here in the Dark Tower universe.
Yeah. But I mean, I see the connection, but a really powerful character who either can't or won't intervene directly.
Yeah.
But and is like super, super mysterious and unexplained. But like that doesn't really answer the question. That's just a literary reference.
I mean, it's fun because first of all, Spinagon, that was great, and I don't think Spinagon was the only person. I know I got at least one email, and we had one Reddit post of someone saying a similar thing. I like that a lot. I also think it seems like the thing that is so interesting about Tom Bombadil is that he really wasn't on any sides, right? He was just kind of chilling, didn't want to be involved. It feels to me like Dor is working for someone still. We don't know for sure, but it feels like he's got skin in the game in a way that Tom Bombadil didn't. But I think the comparison that is they're not going to actually do anything directly themselves is absolutely true. Yeah,
I mean, you get the sense that Dor has had to hide his actions, even like Lotho and Closo and Lachesis don't even know that he's been involved, and he has been involved. He was given bear mace to Ralph and so forth.
Yeah. It's really fun. I'm like, I really appreciate that King kind of just doesn't say much about who he is or where he came from, and it's not that he won't by the end of the book, but I think answering that question here and now would distract from the ongoing machinations of the plot a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm once again, I'm totally fine with this just being a question, a mystery.
Yeah. So they arrive at the convention center, and Ralph has this that he's thinking about in his head. And maybe he thought, I want a rematch with Doc number 3. Oh, Ralph, Carolyn mourned. Clint Eastwood? Again? No, not Clint Eastwood. Not Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger either. Not even John Wayne. He was no big action hero or movie star. He was just plain old Ralph Roberts from Harris Avenue. That didn't make the grudge he bore the Doc with the rusty scalpel any less real, however. I really loved this for a lot of reasons. The first one that I want to talk about is just anytime the voice of Carolyn pops up in Ralph's internal monologue, I think it's worth pointing out and exploring a little bit here. And that she's serving as a version of his conscience on a lot of levels, and a version of his internal existence that he can't quite deal with himself, and so he otherizes it in the form of Carolyn. And I love Carolyn mourned, right? Like that's so powerful.
Yeah, Carolyn is his gradually dawning self-awareness, I think.
Yeah.
I can't help but also make the connection between Clint Eastwood and Ralph, and
of course,
another character trapped within his own version of masculinity, Roland, who though never really realizes what a slave he is to his own upbringing, the way we see Ralph beginning to realize here. I still think it's interesting how toward the beginning of the Gunslinger, or early in the story anyway, we identified this theme of masculinity as being important to how Roland is defined, and it never he never became aware of it. It never became a thing that was textual. It was always subtextual. This book is making it much more textual and explicit, though, as a theme.
Yeah, I don't. I could see Roland having the internal thought that Ralph had last week about masculinity and how he was raised. I think the difference between Ralph and Roland is I think Roland would have those thoughts and then just like shrug his shoulders and be like, well, nothing I can do about that.
Yeah.
I think he is aware of, like, that's the fascinating thing about Roland is he has these moments of like brilliant self-awareness that like pop in, and he just never does anything about them. He's just like, yep, I learned something about myself today, but I will continue on doing what I was doing.
Yep. Time to continue plotting
like it's
along.
just like you think of the version of Roland who tells the story of his hawk, and how his hawk is like his first sacrifice. Like he knows he's the man who sacrifices the things he loves to get what he wants. He knows that, and yet he won't stop doing it, at least at the very beginning.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Ralph seems to be a person who is not only aware of that, but trying to change it. Although I think in this week's chapters, we get a man who is like maybe trying a little less hard to change it. Like just this idea that like we'll talk about this in a minute, but he's so mad. He's so mad about everything. And he just wants to take out his anger on everything around him.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, his self-awareness doesn't seem to be, doing much for him at this point in time.
For sure. So before they go, Lois wants one final question of Old Door, and it's a big one. Why the hell were we sent out to High Ridge? Door says that they were sent because Clotho and Lachesis were avoiding having them deal with Atropos directly, thinking they could accomplish the same thing, the same task, by avoiding him instead of confronting him directly. But the weird part about this is in doing this, they unknowingly fulfilled a true purpose all along, one that Door doesn't tell them, but we can guess has something to do with a little boy named Patrick. I love this complication of the purpose as just a thing that doesn't make any fucking sense and is really confusing and unable to understand. Like Old Door basically says it's both at the same time. That's very often the way things are within the purpose. Like this, by avoiding doing something that you don't want to do or that you think other people shouldn't do, you're actually fulfilling what they wanted you to do all along.
Yeah, that's just like classic Ka, isn't it? Like whatever you thought Ka wanted you to do, it's really more whatever you ended up doing was what Ka wanted you to do.
Yeah, it's almost like when you send a Terminator back in time to kill the woman who creates the man who will lead the resistance against you, but in doing so, you actually create the woman that will make the man that leads the resistance against you.
Yeah, and then you abandon that sort of grandfather paradox for all of your sequels. But just plot wise though, it's interesting because we really don't know what the purpose of the rally is now, because they saved Patrick Danville. That was important. I feel pretty confident in saying that was the purpose of going to the High Ridge, was to save Patrick Danville. But now I don't know. I have no idea what the purpose of the convention center is.
Yeah, I mean, it could very well just be, well, he's going to be there now too, so you got to stop that. Which feels it feels clunky a little bit. So we're not 100% sure on that.
Yeah, it does feel a little clunky, but if it ends up being the case, then I'll just be like, yeah, okay, sure. So.
Sure. Door won't answer any more questions or actually give them any advice on what to do next, but he does actually subtly give them advice, which is something worth talking about, because as he's saying goodbye to everyone, he looks at Joe and says, "Don't forget your comb." And that means nothing to Joe, but of course it means a lot to Ralph. And that is kind of how Ralph gets his direction for what to do next. He's got to get Joe's comb back. He's got to find where Atropos is keeping this comb. He's got to find where Atropos is keeping Lois's earring. He has to get these things back. But I think the most interesting thing about this is why Door won't just tell him that directly, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think we're going to get an answer to that, but it definitely seems like Door is playing one of these games where he wants to give Ralph just enough clues that he can use his free will, quote unquote, to find the answer, but maybe just telling him is breaking some rule that he's bound by as an agent of the purpose. Yeah,
I mean that seems like what we're setting up here, right? That if he could intervene directly, he would, but he can't, so he's got to be a little bit sly about it. I love how King it's such a fun idea of like Joe being like, he told me not to forget my comb, and I don't know what that means. But we're like, there we go. Yeah. And so our characters know what to do now. Yeah,
it's very low key, and of course, as you said, Door knows exactly the effect this will have on Ralph, which is like, okay, Ralph is worried about the earrings, super worried about the earrings, so he's going to prioritize this now. And basically, Door has, single-handedly with a couple of words redirected their short-term objective, actually.
Yeah, totally. So he is directly interfering. He's just doing it in an indirect way.
Yeah, right. You got to wonder, like, if the referees who are watching are like, come on, Door.
Yeah.
That was over the line.
Foul? Is that a foul?
Yeah.
They're meeting up and looking and backing through the tape. There is no foul on the play. Yeah.
Oh, thank God.
So the two enter the death bag surrounding the convention center, and they immediately feel it like sucking the life out of them. And one of the things they're like, immediately is, how does no one else feel this? How does no one else feel this thing that's happening to us right now? And they kind of reason that maybe they do in some ways. And I love this paragraph here. Ralph found himself remembering times in his life when he'd hit the emotional equivalent of a cold spot while swimming or clear air turbulence while flying. You'd be cruising along through your day, sometimes feeling great, sometimes just feeling okay, but getting along and getting it done. And then, for no apparent reason at all, you'd go down in flames and crash. A sense of what the hell's the use would slide over you, unconnected to any real event in your life at that moment, but incredibly powerful all the same. And you'd felt like simply creeping back into bed and pulling the covers up over your head. So he reasons that maybe the reason people feel this way is because they've entered some sort of future death bag event area and just can feel the death and decay and awfulness of the area sucking some of their life force out of them.
Yeah, that's fun because, I've been kind of sick the last couple of days, and I'm like, oh no, their death bag creeping over me. Is that what I'm feeling?
This is what's fun is I think King takes a experience that I think we all have, right? We've all had experiences where for just no discernible reason we just feel like shit.
Yeah.
And we're just like, I shouldn't be unhappy right now. Everything should be fine. Nothing is specifically wrong. Why do I feel like ass all of a sudden? And he puts a reason to it. And I think that's just really fun.
Yeah. It's supernatural, death bag evil.
Yeah. Just think about those bugs crawling over you at all times and you don't notice it.
I mean, I honestly feel like there's little giant trilobites crawling all over me right now, to be completely honest.
That moves us into our next area because there is something else milling around the convention center with all the people. It's giant trilobites, as they're described, crawling over everything. Scavengers, Ralph reasons, waiting to feast upon all the horror and death that will happen here. It's almost if they can eat that stuff, and so they're here to do so.
Yeah, I don't really know what to make of the little critters, because part of me wants to relate them to Toadash, but I honestly think that I just keep going back to Toadash because everything looks like a nail when you only have a hammer, and then like my only canonical source of bad monster things is Toadash. So I don't know. Maybe they are just denizens of like aura space, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah. I think there's nothing to say, but I agree with just like in the world of Stephen King, we know that monsters exist, but most of the monsters seem to come from this Toadash space. But I mean, we just don't know enough about how this whole aura world works.
Yeah, right.
But there's not the only scavengers here, though, right? I love that King constructs this comparison. He has all these reporters here. They're kind of milling about and waiting. They're discussing the story that's going to happen today. They're excited to exploit both sides of the argument. Like there's this thing like we're like, oh, make sure if we see Helen Deep now, she's Ed's wife and she was at High Ridge, so she'll be a great interview. And they're vultures too. And King constructs a scene to where Lois and Ralph are like looking at these crawling trilobites, like crawling all over them, like crawling up their legs and crawling in their mouth. And it's like this scavenger on scavengers thing that I find so delightful.
I honestly didn't make the connection between the reporters being scavengers, but I do love the idea that King is criticizing these vultures making money off of this probable violence while they're being investigated by monsters that are feeding on probable violence. Yeah,
it's interesting because that would be the type of connection that I would think, in my experience with King, that he would make textual. Like he would have a character comment on that idea, that like Ralph would look at them and see like, vultures on vultures type of thing. And it's interesting that he doesn't do that he leaves that kind of image for the reader to suss out on their own, because it's not that King doesn't use imagery a lot, but we've talked about this before, that he often like makes his imagery clear, and he's very interested. I think, he's a storyteller, and if he makes a metaphor for the benefit of the story, he wants you, the reader, to get the metaphor. He wants to be sure you get it. And so he often has his characters verbalize the metaphor in certain ways. And I don't know, it's interesting that he chose not to do that here.
Sure.
Or it's possible that he didn't mean to construct this image at all, and it's just me.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, like, it slipped by me, So either I'm one of the readers that's so dumb that he needs to put these things in the text so that I'll get them, or
I
you
don't think
just
that's true.
you just happened to get something that maybe he put in there subconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now that you point it out, though, it feels very appropriate, you know?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. That's a, like when it clicked for me, it just felt so intentional that it just like
yeah.
he set this up all on purpose. But I don't know, the mind of a creator works in mysterious ways, and maybe on a subconscious level he was making that point, but his conscious self didn't clue in on it.
Or sometimes when you're writing, you forget why you did something.
Yeah, that's true.
Like you don't necessarily go back and like remember exactly why something was the way it was, and so yeah, who knows?
Yeah. So Lois and Ralph are starting to attract some attention by, well, acting like old crazy people that are screaming. Like, I love Lois's reaction to the bugs is just a scream, and like so there's just a bunch of people standing around watching this old lady scream. So they realize that they need to kind of divert attention away from them and allow Ralph to look around for Atropos's trail without all these people freaking out about what they're doing there. So Lois decides to distract everyone by fawning over Connie Chung, who is a real person, by the way. Those youngins amongst us might not know who Connie Chung was, but the 90s were a pretty big deal for her as a reporter. She was very, very high profile news reporter, lots of big interviews and big shows, but she kind of faded out and disappeared by the mid 2000s. So not very well known these days, but I remember hearing Connie Chung's name all the time in the 90s.
Yeah, me too, definitely. I was kind of tickled here. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I wonder why Stephen King decided to have a extensive Connie Chung interlude instead of just having it be some kind of generic reporter.
Man, for the same reason they drink a Coke and not a soda, for the same reason they rent from Hertz and not a car rental company. Like, the specificity is like where he lives.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think also it makes it feel a little bit more like, oh, this is like a big deal because they sent Connie Chung. They didn't just send Bob whatever. And
yeah, for sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I love this part where Lois calls Connie Chung a little China doll, which I feel like is this kind of unthinking insensitivity that most people, white people, would not have batted their eyes about in the 90s. But like, you can imagine Connie Chung's reaction to that, like just being this exasperated annoyance at the way people interact with her in that way. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. Like, do you think Lois was doing that on purpose, or do you think Lois was aware that that was dismissive and rude, that she was playing a character, or it's just like a person like Lois, a person who's Lois's age, like wouldn't have thought anything more about calling an Asian woman a little China doll?
It's kind of ambiguous because I think Lois is being intentionally annoying because her goal is to hold Connie's attention and distract her.
Sure.
But then the further question is, okay, but is she aware of like everything she's doing? And I think what's funny is I think that's a subtly important question because it's actually tied to the question of how competent do we think Lois is actually? Because Ralph kind of doesn't think she's that reliable and trustworthy and competent. And we've seen some evidence that she's more competent than he thinks she is. On the other hand, we have stuff like her screaming loudly in public when she sees the trilobites, which is not the actions of a gunslinger. So it's like, I can't help but think that we're kind of meant to wonder, like, is Lois secretly a badass, or is she actually the way Ralph thinks of her? Or I think maybe kind of more realistically, she's a complex human being and she's somewhere in the middle.
I love the moments where she has this level of self-awareness where she says like, sometimes I'm the way Bill thought I was, but I'm not stupid. And I think that's in this chapter, that's one of the things she says is that she's aware and knowledgeable of things, but does have her moments. And this feels like one of those moments. It's one of those things that were like, maybe the first time I read this, I didn't even notice it. But like in 2021, I just immediately roll my eyes at calling an Asian woman a little China doll.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Meanwhile, while While Lois is being just a tad bit racist, Ralph is searching for Atropos. And I love in this search, he kind of walks up to the front doors of the convention center. And I love this idea that King sets up as like what a well-trafficked aura area looks like. The text here says, what he saw in front of the doors was a semi-transparent blackish substance that puzzled him at first. It was about 2 inches deep and looked almost sort of like a geological formation. That couldn't be, though, could it? If what he was looking at was real, the way objects in the short time world were real at least, the stuff would have blocked the doors from opening, and it wasn't doing that. As Ralph watched, 2 TV techs strolled ankle deep through the stuff as if it were no more substantial than low-lying ground mist. So he reasons that this is just like when people gather consistently in a place, their aura sticks to that place a little bit. And I think he describes it the way like frequented stairs will kind of like warp and scuff in a certain way. Like I love like you look at old stone or marble staircases that have been just trafficked for hundreds of years, and you can just see the middle of them where most people go is just kind of like smoothed and shined because of the amount of foot traffic that it gets. So this is like aura foot traffic smoothing.
Yeah, that's always amazing. Anytime you go somewhere really old, like in Europe, and you see the stairs like that, you're just like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Hundreds of years of slow wear and tear of just people going about their day. It's wild.
Yep.
I don't know if you ever, like, another version of that is just how like people will cut their own trails through grass. Like at where we went to college, people were constantly making their own shortcuts through grass that would eventually just wear down into dirt because you would just slowly kill all the life there. And eventually they would just pave over the area and just give up. Like there'd be signs like go around please, and eventually they just give up and just put concrete there.
I remember that happening distinctly and being like we won.
We won. So while looking at this weird door, he finally finds what he's looking for mixed in with this blackish aura traffic, this bloody mucousy substance on the doors that are leading away from it. It is the taint of Atropos himself.
Gross.
Yeah, it's really gross. It's distinct. And I love this idea that like Atropos can't stay away from this place. Like it's like a drug to him. Like within this death bag aura in this heavily trafficked place. Like I think Ralph imagines him just like walking up to the door and like putting his grubby hands on the door and just like in this place that makes Ralph and Lois feel sick and uncomfortable is like his place of strength. The book is really going hard to just make us fucking hate and be grossed out by this guy. And that's going to continue through these next 2 chapters.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I just saw him as being, the same as Clotho and Lachesis, except, bad. But this is making him seem a lot more, malevolent and supernaturally dark and twisted. Bloody mucusy substance is a very evocative phrase.
And I love the way like Ralph hates him so much, and so every time he describes him, it's emphasizing the disgustingness of it. Like he could imagine Atropos standing right where he was, looking, grinning, then stepping forward and putting his hands on those doors, caressing them, creating those filthy, filmy marks. Like it's so venomous the way he describes this stuff.
Yeah. Love it.
So having got what they need, Ralph and Lois head out and follow Atropos' trail out of the convention center. And then we end our first chapter. We did it. We did chapter 23.
Yay.
Let's pat ourselves on the back and move on to chapter 24. The trail leads away from the convention center, and the 2 eventually get to the wall of the death bag, and they're afraid to walk through something that looks and sounds this awful. And speaking of sounds, they hear 2 sounds on the death bag, one overlaying the other. The top one was a silvery sighing. The wind might make a sound like that, Ralph thought, if it learned how to weep. It was a creepy sound, but the one beneath it was actively unpleasant, a slobbery chewing noise, as if a gigantic toothless mouth were ingesting large amounts of soft food somewhere close by.
Everything about this is gross. Everything's gross.
It is. But I love the duality of that sound, right? You have this one part that's like sad and mourning and wistful, and the other angry and gross and disgusting. And so it's almost as if King is saying that the death bag is made out of both purpose and random, that both purpose and random are here and present right now. You have the random that exists in the disgustingness and the purpose that exists in like this mournful windy cry.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot. It's consistent with the idea that life and death are sort of their own axis, orthogonal to purpose and random.
Yeah,
And so death can have elements of purpose and random within it.
Mm-hmm. I also love the sound that the random part is making. Like, this is the joke we made at the beginning of our podcast, but the get out, fuck off, beat it, hate you, kill you, eat you. Like, it's so wonderful and textual. And I just, I love the feeling that like, obviously I didn't listen to the audiobook, but you read that and like the way King writes it, the way he spells it. I know this is the first time really you're seeing it spelled, but it just, I think it gets, it allows you to hear it the way it sounds in a really effective way, I think.
Yeah, I love it. I could kind of tell from the way the audiobook reader did it that it's like it sounds like he has like a slobbery, toothless mouth when it's gross. This is a really gross part of the book. I love it.
Mm-hmm. So there's this interesting beat that I want to talk to you about for a bit here, because as our characters follow the trail of Atropos into what is life or death stakes for literally thousands of people, there's this part where Lois keeps having to stop because her underwear keeps falling down. What Ralph calls the revolt of the foundation garments. What did you think about this part?
I'm going to confess I'm having trouble with the symbolic reading of the dysfunctional underpants. On the most literal level, you can see it as a sign that Lois is like losing weight due to her magical de-aging, and thus she's her pants are falling off. But it's like, but why?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's doing work to do exactly what I think you were talking about a little bit ago, to make Lois seem a little incompetent and clumsy, right? Because she's literally like almost tripping over herself, like trying to yank up her underwear. And yeah, part of it is because she has changed so rapidly. Like, Lois was always described as someone that was on the thicker side, right? And I think part of her de-aging has probably been a weight loss as well, a rapid weight loss. And so she is a little bit clumsier. But I do think it does nicely fit into what Ralph's view of her is. And I don't know if I pulled the exact phrasing of the sentence, but he basically says something to the effect of, I would have sent you home like a while ago if it wasn't for the fact that Atropos has your earring and I need to keep you close by me because it's the only way I know you're safe, right? It's like this complete dismissal of everything she contributes to the whole operation. And I mean, this coming on the back of her incredible success at the High Ridge, and that she was key to them getting out and key to everything, good that happened there relative to all the badness. It's really surprising that he can't break out of this image of her. And I think it doesn't help when he's peppered with her tripping over her underwear.
Yeah, he gets really annoyed with her. Like he's like, just take him off, and she's like, no, I'm not gonna take him off. And it's an interesting sort of source of tension to create here, because it's like undignified for her, and you can see why she would be like embarrassed and frustrated by it. And I'm remembering that moment when they were driving to High Ridge where like Lois, the text says something along the lines of like Lois looked at him, in a panic, obviously asking him to tell her what to do because she was a woman and needed a man to tell her what to do. It's kind of what Ralph is thinking. And
Sure.
I remember I remember reading that and being like, that's a little bit of projection there, isn't it, Ralph? Like you don't know what to do either. You probably have exactly the same expression on your face right now. I mean, maybe Ralph is the one who takes the leadership in that situation, but like he's projecting all these dynamics and thoughts into Lois that I don't think are actually there.
Yeah, and in spite of being aware of that on some level, he kind of continues to do it. It's really interesting. I hope we get a point where Ralph sees her strength, because we really just haven't gotten that opportunity yet. I mean, it has happened. It's just Ralph is seemingly ignorant of it. Yeah,
I really do hope that there's some payoff one way or the other to this. I mean, I feel pretty sure there will be in some form, right? It might not be in the form you're expecting. But.
Sure. So Ralph and Lois head down Niebolt Street into a not so nice part of the city of Derry. And here they encounter their old wino friend. And it is the coincidence of encountering another person they've seen. Derry apparently only has about 15 people in it because they keep running into the same people over and over again. That Ralph gets this. A queer sense of fatalism was creeping over Ralph, and with it an intuitive understanding of the forces which now surrounded them. It was one he could have done without. It hardly mattered if those forces were beneficent or malign, random or purpose. They were gigantic. That was what mattered. And that they made things like Clotho and Lachesis had said about choice and free will seem like a joke. He felt as if he and Lois were roped to the spokes of a giant wheel, a wheel which kept rolling them back to where they had come from, even as it took them deeper and deeper into this horrible tunnel.
Yeah, that's great.
It's great imagery, and of course, the Ka as a wheel imagery. I can't remember. I tried to look into where the first use of the phrase Ka as a wheel is used in the Dark Tower series, because I was curious if it was in the later half of the series or if it was from the beginning, and I couldn't find a definitive answer on that. So if anyone listening knows for sure, let me know. But I like the idea that this, over the breaks in between books, King is kind of developing his understanding of Ka, and maybe like developing his understanding of how the ending of the Dark Tower is going to go.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me, this passage reminds me a lot of what Roland and I think also Susan Delgado specifically said about Ka, this idea of the wheel and the wind.
Did she use the wheel?
I don't know
metaphor?
if she actually said the wheel specifically, but definitely the tone of it, the idea of Ka, of this feeling like Ka was pulling you inexorably into this fate that you couldn't do anything about it. That was the sense of fatalism. I think the word fatalism is exactly perfect. It's funny that the word fatalism never occurred to me in context of Ka, but like that's like exactly what Roland is, right? He's like the ultimate fatalist, where he's just like Ka, like that's the way he'll just shrug and say Ka, that's like fatalism.txt. So.
Yeah, and I don't think Ralph was the type of person who would have been described as fatalist before the start of this book, but I think you get to a certain point where like you keep meeting the same, like within the span of 20 minutes he's run into Joe Weiser and this old wino again, and like we were joking but really feeling like there's like 20 people that are surrounding them or that are chained to them in this quartet that he just keeps running into. And so this feeling of we keep going back to where we started. Here's Joe again. Here's the wino again. It's just like this idea of Ka being a wheel that is rolling forward. And so they're both advancing forward along the plot, but also spinning round and round again and coming back to where they started again and again, even as they move forward. I love the combination of the Ka as a wheel metaphor with Ralph's ongoing, being forced down a dark tunnel metaphor. I think like King just like kind of effortlessly combines those two things to like complete the image. And I really like it.
Yeah. I like that.
So the wino is a rather convenient battery for the pair, as they give him some money while they suck some of his life force out.
At least they pay the man this time.
Yeah. This is something I wanted to talk to you about a little bit here, because we've gotten throughout the course of this book little snapshots of what life in Derry is like through these little aura vignettes. Like we saw the little kids playing. Now we see the wino. We see we like through their views of the auras and the way they kind of suck people's auras for strength. We kind of get a little bit of Derry, and it reminds me of Salem's Lot a little bit, in that a lot of Salem's Lot was focused on the people of the town. Now this is not the same, right? This is a different kind of book. It is less focused on the citizens of the city than Salem's Lot was focused on the citizens of that small town. But King can't help but flesh out the town, and I think just like we go through this whole thing with the wino where he goes through his rigmarole about how he has the job opportunity and he just needs money for bus fare, which is like the oldest lie in the book that I've actually had a homeless person tell me before. Like I've literally had that story told to me before. Right. That's how common it is.
I wonder if it's the same guy in College Station where we went to college.
Probably. Yeah. So like we just get to see little bits of Derry through this. And I mean, this is not a book about Derry, like I don't think you're going to leave this book knowing about the city of Derry in a way that like reading it would give you. but King can't help but show us little bits and pieces, little vignettes through just the Aura Battery people.
Yeah, there's that, and then there's also, as we get into this crappy area of town, like there's this kind of creepy feeling of just like the way people treat Ralph and Lois as they're just walking around, where it's like there's like this sense of darkness and evil, and I know that there's evil, some kind of evil lurks within Derry, but I don't know if that's like what this is exactly. It doesn't matter to me so much. It's just, it feels really uncomfortable, and I guess it makes sense that they're growing near to the lair of Atropos, because it makes sense that things would get really shitty as we get closer to his house.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, this is where I wink at the people in our audience who have read the other King books and know that this is a particular area. Like the drop of Nebolt Street was specific to people who know the city of Derry a little bit more, that this is some bad stuff hangs out here.
I figured.
Yeah. So after getting their charge, Ralph and Lois are now kind of floating along the trail of Atropos. I love the casual description of that, is that they're not even necessarily walking anymore. They're just kind of like, just floating along.
Yeah, I really like this idea where it's sort of ambiguous how corporeal they are. Like floors are optional, walking is optional, walls are optional, and like do they even really have bodies? Probably not really. It's sort of a convenience that they seem to have bodies. It's really fun.
So Lois kind of just looks at Ralph at some point and says, like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do to this guy? And Ralph tells her, and then she says, if it needs to be done, I'll help you do it. He was absurdly touched by this, and at pains to hide the rest of his thinking from her, that the only reason she was still with him at all was so that he could keep a protective eye on her. The thought led him back towards her earrings, but he pushed the image of them away, not wanting her to see or even suspect them in his aura. So a couple things. We already kind of talked about the idea that she's only here to keep an eye on. And I love absurdly touched. Like, absurdly is such an interesting word here, because it's almost as if he's demeaning her via that language, right? Like, why is it absurd to be touched by that? Like, she's been supporting you the whole time.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, it's condescending. It's like it's like when my daughter, my youngest, is like, here, I'll help you carry that giant heavy thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, sweetie.
Aww.
Yeah, and then
thank you.
I let her put her hand on it and like make it harder for me, right? And it's like that's kind of Ralph's attitude about this, which is like you said, totally unfair, because she's been helpful and probably will be more helpful, I'm guessing.
Yeah, this is one of those things that I wonder about, the more I really dive into Stephen King, because I think we noticed a similar thing in Salem's Lot, where I think we said Ben and Susan's relationship was not quite as romantic and wonderful as perhaps the book thinks it's being. And so I start to wonder, like, how much of this is intentional with the book or just a result of the way King writes relationships. And I don't want to conclude on that, but it just seems like, are we supposed to be clocking the weirdness with which Ralph treats Lois? I feel like the answer to that question is yes, but I don't know, like, to what end.
I mean, I would ask you as the King expert, like, does King have like ideal male-female relationships? Is there a story where you're like, oh yeah, there's this wonderful love story that has no terrible weirdness at all?
I'm clocking through relationships and books in my head real quick. My short answer is no. I think Susanna and Eddie Dean are one of the closest ones. Now I'm sure our listeners are screaming ones that they can think of, but none are jumping out. Like, there are I think beautiful love stories in King books, but they're usually plagued with some terrible monstrous thing.
Well, and in my limited experience, usually it's like one of them has a character flaw, well, one or both of the characters has a character flaw, a probably fatal character flaw that is going to undermine the relationship. And in this particular case, it sounds like Ralph's the one with the character flaw, and I think King is aware of that, honestly.
Like he has to be, but I mean, like the reason I'm thinking about this right now is because, you know, I was saying similar things as we were going through Salem's Lot, that like the terribleness of this relationship has to be intentional, but I don't think that book paid off on that idea in a satisfying manner. And I don't know if that's just because he was a young writer, and just, you know, we have already discussed the flaws in some of the characters in that book, or not. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, if the way Ralph treats Lois doesn't pay off in an interesting way by the end of this book, then I'm going to start seeing patterns here. And not that I'm calling it a flaw of his writing or anything, but just like I'm trying to scratch my head at like why that would be happening. And I don't know the answer to that quite yet.
Yeah, I mean, I feel so confident that we're on the right track that I guess we'll have to have a whole different conversation if it turns out not to be.
Sure. Yeah. We'll find out. The other part of this is, of course, Ralph absolutely convinced that Lois knows nothing about the earring yet, and how much danger she's in. We don't know if she does. Like that has not been revealed to us yet. But like, I don't know. To me, it just seems absurd to think that she doesn't at this point. Like, oh, he's just gonna keep this out of his mind so his aura won't show it. And then we have so many, like at the end of this chapter, we have this thing where his mind just goes on a tangent, and she picks up on it. She's like, Ralph, what is that? And so it's like, I think it's like we have the scene where Ralph thinks he's being clever and hiding something from it, and then immediately after that have a scene where Ralph goes on a mental tangent and Lois immediately picks up on it. And it seems to be that what we're doing there is saying, Ralph, you idiot, she knows. She totally knows.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. As we've said, she's had the power much longer than him. She can do stuff he can't do. He's probably an open book to her.
Yeah. So at last they approach the end of the trail, and we see an old dead tree split in half by lightning. Has there ever, Matt, been a better symbol for random destructiveness and chaos than a tree split in half by lightning?
That's great. Although I did see a news story today about a woman who was awakened by a meteorite crashing through her roof and slamming into the pillow on the opposite side of the bed from her. So
Jesus Christ,
that would also serve. But yes, lightning hitting a tree is a great image, of course. Yes.
So this is where our pal Atropos lives, and this is when King via Ralph goes on a tangent. And I have to read this, and then we can talk about it. Don't you play with Chucky, Ralph's mother used to tell him. He's a dirty boy. Ralph didn't know if Chucky was a dirty boy or not, but he was fruit crackers, no question about that. Chucky Engstrom liked to hide behind the tree in his front yard with a long tree branch, which he called his peeking wand. When a woman in a full skirt passed, Chucky would tiptoe after her, extend the peeking wand under the hem, and then lifting. Quite often he got to check out the color of the woman's underwear. The color of ladies' underwear held great fascination for Chucky, before she realized what was going on and chased the wildly cackling lad back to his house, threatening to tell his mother. The airport fence pulled out and up by the old oak's roots reminded Ralph of the way the skirts of Chucky's victims had looked when he started to raise them with the peeking wand. The peaky wand. What the fuck? I love Stephen King, and this is one of those things where you read this and you're just like, Stephen, what the fuck?
Right.
Like, I just like, how do you come? This is the thing that fascinates me about this man, is how do you come up with something like this?
Yeah.
Like you build an image of your mind, and I know like exactly what he's talking about. This is like the way a tree root will like lift a chain link fence in a very specific kind of way. Like I can see that image in my head, and I think the peaky wand helps build that image. But it's just like, how do you come up with it?
Yeah, right. The other funny part is that I'm like, part of me wants to be like, well, this is a thing that really happened that King is telling. Is
maybe he knew a
story.
kid. Maybe he knew a Chucky in his youth.
Yeah,
that did the same thing.
But then I'm like, I don't really know that that's true, because King is so good at coming up with these weird, tangential kind of skeezy, uncomfortable, real life things that I can't believe all of these things happen. All these things
Yeah.
that he thinks of.
I mean, maybe there was a time in Stephen King's life as a young man where he was like, when he says the color of ladies' underwear held great fascination for Chucky. Maybe the color of ladies' underwear held great fascination for little Stevie, and he didn't go so far as to make a peaky wand.
Yeah.
But he thought about it. But he thought about, wouldn't it be nice if I could just see what the under, like, you know, this, like, you're a young boy and this women are just like fascinating to you. Like, I remember being a young kid, and no, I did not lift up women's skirts, but just women were just fascinating, and they have these things that are different from our things, and we don't understand any of it. And so, I mean, you can kind of see how you could get around to coming up with this vignette, but it's just like how it occurs to you in this moment. It's just wild to me.
So the thing that struck me about it is like, it's it's drawing attention to our proximity to the airport. You know, he could have just mentioned, you know, the tree was nestled against the fence of the airport, and then like my brain would have not registered any information about that. It would that's just too brief. But he gives you a little, like you said, a vignette about the fence of the airport that the tree is next to. It's the airport fence. It's lifting up the airport fence. It's almost like that would be a thing that you could climb under to get into the airport area if you needed to do that for some reason. So yeah, that's
it attaches this discomfort to the connection between the tree and the airport, which we know is kind of like the source. Like, this is where everything started, right? The airport is where everything started. And so it's back to Ralph's feeling of Ka as a wheel, that we're back to where we started. And we can see how this evil influence has like been invading and lifting the fence and going beyond the barriers of normalcy to wreak havoc. Yeah. I think you're right. That's a really good point, that it attaches a negative connotation to this idea that just explaining how the fence is or the root is lifting up the fence, there's no emotional connection to that. But by telling the story of Chucky that is uncomfortable, and let's be honest here, literal assault. This is a crime this little boy is doing, that he seems to not be aware of at all. It attaches this disturbing connotation to this whole thing, which is absolutely applicable here. Yeah,
right. It kind of casts this idea that the tree itself is somehow a pervert.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Which, I mean, it's Atropos's tree.
Yeah.
Like, I could totally see Atropos with the peaking wand.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So we move on to chapter 25, which is we go down in the tree hole chapter. And as the two prepare to make their way into the opening, Ralph once again ruminates on what he's doing here and why, and he can't help but feel the hand of control on him, and it makes him so angry. And I want to talk about this anger. And those are the ropes, he thought, the ropes, the powers that be used to tie us poor, muddled, short-time creatures to their wheel. He now visualized Clotho and Lachesis through the bright lens of hate, and he thought that the two of them had been here right now. They would have exchanged their uneasy looks and then taken a quick step or two away. And they would be right to do that, he thought. Very right. Ralph, what's wrong? Why are you so angry? And he is. He's really angry. He's angry at everything. And I want to talk about that with you for a minute here, because like Lois is not near as angry as he is about all this. And I think that it's important for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I want to have a little sidebar to talk about his anger and also expand on a thought that I mentioned last week.
Sure.
Because I previously said that Ralph and Lois are innocents, and that's what made their dangerous and tragic mission at High Ridge all the more emotionally impactful, because I really found it quite moving. And I realized during my weekly session of listening to the Fellowship of the Ring soundtrack and silently weeping to myself that the hobbits, and particularly Frodo and Sam, are also created specifically to key into this feeling, this feeling of innocence, right? The hobbits are a whole species of innocence. They look and act basically like children. They have no awareness of worldly dangers. They can't defend themselves. They're the last people in the world that should be tasked with this epic heroic mission of sacrifice, you know, and thus they're the ones who are tasked with the mission. In fact, they're the ones who achieve it. I compared Lois and Ralph to Merry and Pippin last week, but what we're about to find down at the bottom of the tree is going to make them a much more apt comparison to Frodo and Sam, actually. But thinking about the anger and how that relates to this, there's this anger, there's this sense of unfairness. This isn't fair. This isn't right. We didn't ask for this. We don't deserve this. I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had ever happened. It's this very relatable, and I think very central to King's view on the human condition, idea of a sense of powerlessness and unfairness.
Yeah.
No,
I think you're spot on there. And I think that slots Lois so perfectly into the Sam character, right? Because like Sam is there to kind of be like the heart of the whole thing. And like the idea that Frodo is the longer he's been tasked with the task, he's getting angrier and corrupted and worse. And Sam is there being like, look, man, like I understand, but this is worth it. We got to do what we got to do. And like Lois throughout this whole thing is just like, yeah, like I'm not happy with being controlled either, but like there's 2,000 lives on the line, and like I'm gonna do what I need to do. I'm gonna do this because we have to. And she's just able to shrug off the feeling of manipulation and control in a way that Ralph just can't get over. And I think again and again, her role is to kind of snap Ralph out of that. It's like I think that the most important part about this thing is not necessarily Ralph's anger, but Lois's confusion at the anger. Like why? Like why are you so angry? Like you need to get over this. Lois has just moved past it. She's just been like, yeah, they annoyed me and I wish they hadn't have done it, but like what am I gonna do?
Right. This thing needs to be done, and I was the one who was tapped to do it, and maybe I do wish somebody else had been tapped to do it, but
sure,
here we are.
Yeah. Like
so
wishing the ring had never come to me does not stop the fact that the ring has come to me.
Yeah.
And I can't give it away. I can't like it's too late for that.
I mean, just to finish out that passage, the response is, so do all who live in such times, but that is not ours to decide. All we can do is decide what to do with the time that is given to us, which is what Lois's attitude is.
Yeah. So Lois is actually Gandalf, is what you're saying.
Lois is channeling Gandalf at the very least. Yes. I mean, I think Sam also embodies, like you pointed out. I didn't quite make the distinction between Sam and Frodo, but I agree that she's very Sam-like in her stolidity and just like, okay, now I guess I have to go save Frodo from the orc tower. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah, I really hope Lois gets her orc tower moment.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Sam Dolph.
Sam Dolph. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I love that. So you worked in a Lord of the Rings reference before the moment in the book that is textually a Lord of the Rings reference.
Well, yes.
Impressive.
I only feel slightly ahead of the game because I did offhandedly mention Merry and Pippin last week.
You did.
So I almost had it. But.
I just want to say, I don't know if I've told you this, Matt, but we get emails probably at least once a week. There are people that like, thanks so much, love your show. I'm rereading Lord of the Rings, or I'm reading Lord of the Rings for the first time. So you were having an effect on people.
That's wonderful.
So the two head down into the tree, needing to go up a few levels in order to be able to stand the overwhelming stench of the place. I love that King has introduced this movement of time, like being like as they go up in levels, time moves faster because it gives us our very distinct ticking clock, right? The death clock of Derry of the convention center is ticking faster and faster, but they need to do it here because they can't stand being here without it. And also they're underground, so they lose all sense of what time is passing. It's just this really perfect tension riser here.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's terrible. You're like, yeah, I guess this is necessary. There's no other way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like this passage here. I want to talk about this for a sec. Don't butt into what doesn't concern you, short time, Atropos had said, but he had butted in. And not just because of what the little bald doctors called Ka either. He had gotten involved because what Atropos was up to was his concern, whatever the little creep might think to the contrary. Derry was his town, Lois Chass his friend, and Ralph found within himself a sincere desire to make Doc 3 sorry he had ever seen Lois's diamond earrings. So Matt, here's a guy who moments ago was furious, absolutely furious at how Ka has manipulated him, about how the doctors have manipulated him into doing this thing, into giving him this ring that he didn't want. And in minutes later, he goes, I'm not here just because of Ka. I'm here because I want to be here, because this is my town and I want to defend it. Like, he's acknowledging his own involvement in this whole thing. And it's like he doesn't notice the contradiction there.
Yeah, right. I mean, it much closer to what Lois's perspective was. Mm-hmm. I don't really think this is happening, but I kind of almost wonder if Lois isn't like using aura powers to soothe him.
That'd be funny. Yeah.
I think he would notice if that were the case, but
probably.
I think she's just using, human powers to soothe him, actually.
Yeah. So they eventually get down the ladder in the tree as it opens up into, well, a home equipped with a combined kitchen, bedroom, dinner table with a meal still on it, a mattress, a mirror. So, Matt, is this an interdimensional being that ekes out his existence on planes beyond our understanding, but, comes down to Earth in physical form to do his duty every so often? Or is it like a troll from Ernest Scared Stupid?
Seeming more like the latter, weirdly. I admit I really thought that like the three fates, the little doctors were like temporary manifestations of vast spiritual metaphorical forces, which was in retrospect not a very well justified belief. It turns out that Atropos is actually just like a dude, lives in a tree.
He needs to eat.
Yeah.
Obviously, he has to travel by foot because he walks from the convention center all the way back to his home.
Yeah.
So, interesting, right? It kind of throws salt in our whole thing about them, being able to cut all the cords on Earth simultaneously because they're just everywhere at once. And they,
I mean, the only way I can sort of recover that would be to say, note the fact that they were described as looking mass produced. Mm-hmm. And then that suggests that maybe there's just like a shitload of them actually, and this is just one of the Atroposes.
I guess, yeah. I mean, it would be, without your further knowledge of dairy, it would be very interesting that like the embodiment of chaotic death just lives in Derry, Maine. This is the place he posts up.
Yeah, this is the one of them, right? Yeah, like
sure.
Okay, I guess. Okay.
Yeah. No answers here, but I think it's just fun. Like when we were talking about the metaphysicalness of these men, I was thinking about this house in a tree that we were going to come across.
Yeah.
And how you were going to react to that.
No, I definitely was thrown off by this. Yeah.
You're just kind of like, okay. Yeah. So he has to eat.
Yeah.
Food.
And where did he get the food? Yeah. Right.
So in the back of this room is an arch leading to a storage area. And I really love this part where Ralph convinces himself that Atropos is back there waiting for them to walk through the arch. So he does like an action movie jump roll thing, which is just hilarious because I know he's not as old anymore, but he's an old man and he just did this diving roll thing. What was he going to do at the end of that roll?
I don't know, man.
Like pretend Atropos was there.
I don't know.
Next?
I don't know. Maybe try to blast him with the finger gun, a finger blast. But I don't know, man.
It's just really funny.
Yeah,
especially since he's really cautious on the way in, but he should have done his dive roll on the way out. Maybe
exactly.
He would have stopped him.
Good point.
So what they find in this storage area is all the stuff Atropos has collected over the past eternity. The first things they find here are Joe's comb and poor old Bill McGovern's Panama hat. And I love Lois's reaction to this hat. He loved this hat. He thought he looked very dashing and debonair when he had it on. He didn't. He just looked like Bill. But he thought he looked good. And that's the important part. Wouldn't you say so, Ralph? There's something so sweet in that, right? It's like, what matters is what you think, and she's touched by that.
Yeah. That at least if it makes you feel good, then that's all that matters. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the two hear something calling to them back further in the room, and just seem to know instantly that this is their purpose. This is what they're there to find and to take. They head further back into Atropos's surprisingly large storage area, and King lets us sweep through objects telling us who they belong to and how they died. without spoiling anything, some of these objects do belong to characters in other King novels. So that's a little Easter egg for people that recognize them. But it doesn't necessarily matter, right? Like, I don't think anything in this moment is taken away because you don't recognize, oh, that's that person from that novel. We get the general idea. Atropos has been doing this for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is one of my favorite passages this week. Rings and magazines, keychains and umbrellas, hats and glasses, rattles and radios. They looked like different things, but Ralph thought they were really all the same thing. The faint, sorrowing voices of people who had found themselves written out of the script in the middle of the second act while they were still learning their lines for the third. People who had been unceremoniously hauled off before their work was done or their obligations fulfilled. People whose only crime had been to be born in the random and to have caught the eye of the madman with the rusty scalpel.
Yeah, I agree. I found it very poignant. And you know, the mention that there's like a rattle in there, it's very sad to think about.
Yeah, like there's a rattle, there's a shoe of a child, there's like it does a really good job of making this seem like this guy has been doing this forever, and it's just monstrous and terrible. And that's why I think, like, you know, the interesting part about like the idea of Atropos, like the idea of random death, is a part of life. And I think, you know, Clotho and Lachesis look at this and say, you know, Atropos is just a part of existence. It's just a part of this thing. But again, like we talked about last week, the personification of this thing as not only a thing that like does the worst possible thing you can imagine, but also keeps trophies of it, is so disgusting that it just fits perfectly what your emotional response to a random, chaotic, purposeless death. I love it. I love Atropos's whole thing.
Yeah.
It just fits. Like, I actually think, you know, Stephen King is more aligned with your look on death than not, right? Like your frustration with death and the way death is depicted. And I think he recognizes that there are many different types of death. And I think he is absolutely horrified by this particular type of death. And so personifies the embodiment of that in the worst possible way he can think of.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's what's cool about it, is it forces me to notice that I actually do feel differently emotionally about random death versus what you might call sort of expected death. I think I can get much more at peace with the idea of you know, a person living out their allotted span and so forth. I don't find it possible to find a peace with the idea of just you know, somebody just died on their way to work today for no reason. You know, it makes no sense. It's terrible.
It's stupid. Yeah. So they continue their way down past tons and tons of stuff until they find a tunnel entirely made of money, which serves to answer our question about where Ed got all that bail money to get Charlie Pickering out of the prison. So Ralph's full-blown hatred of Atropos continues to be great, but I love this part. So he sees, oh, he's got a lot of money, but Ralph had an idea that the little bald-headed son of a bitch still had trouble getting dates. Fucking got him, Ralph. Oh, what a burn. I'm sure the timeless interdimensional death monster is really going to be hurt by your sick burn.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love it.
He hates him so much that he, like, any way he could possibly like take a swipe at him, he's going to do it, even in a way that doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
no, you're right though. Like it's remarkable the degree to which King has infused all of this with such anger. Like Ralph is just like seething, you know, and it comes through even in his descriptions of things that he's looking at. find a way to just broadside Atropos as he's describing money.
So they head their way down the money tunnel and get into a small room, a room entirely made of a bunch of stuff. At the center of that room is a death bag, the apotheosis of all death bags, King says, which a fun Dark Tower reference.
Yeah.
I just like, everyone should use the apotheosis of all X as much as possible. Deserts, death bags, pizza.
Yeah.
The next good slice of pizza I have, I'm not going to say this is great. I'm going to say this is the apotheosis of all pizzas.
Yeah. If I get a really good coffee at a cafe, this is the apotheosis of all cappuccinos.
Let's normalize it, folks. Let's do it.
Everybody, one use of apotheosis in casual conversation today.
Yeah, this is our Fight Club homework for you.
Yeah.
You have to make someone fight you, and you have to use the apotheosis of all X.
Yeah, and if you hear someone say apotheosis, then just give them the Fight Club nod.
So they realize that the thing inside this apotheosis of all death bags is sucking the life force out of them, sucking the ka out of them, which is interesting. Another little wrinkle on what ka means, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm just like, doesn't fit with my model at all, but sure, whatever.
Yeah. So the two realize that the objects in this room belong to people that are still alive. They see Helen's shoe, and that's what helps them realize it. People that will die at the convention center tonight if not stopped. And so, of course, the thing at the center of this whole thing that is sucking the life force from those things is something that belongs to Ed Deepnow, who kicked this whole thing off.
Mm-hmm.
Ralph fashioned some aura scissors, Matt, some aura scissors, and cuts into the apotheosis of all death bags with the apotheosis of all scissors. Boom, did it. My homework is done.
Good job.
And what does he find there? He finds Ed Deepnow's wedding ring. What is the significance of the wedding ring to you? Does Atropos take a thing of significance, or is it just things?
Well, I get the sense that he just takes things, but this is clearly a thing of significance, and you could call it a symbol of his being bound to Helen, and there being some like positive possibility in his life. Because remember, he was this crux person. He could have gone purpose, could have gone random, and you can imagine that like the wedding ring is maybe one of these kind of inflection points where he could have been a good husband, he could have been a wife beater. And so in this case, it does seem to be significant in that way. But but I don't know. It does seem like all the other stuff is mostly just random, trophies.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like Joe Weiser's comb. There's not like Bill McGovern. The hat was very important to him. But what does this little pocket comb matter to Joe Weiser? He seemingly hasn't even noticed it's gone.
Right.
So I think you're right. I do think like, symbolically and metaphorically, the wedding ring, like this whole thing kicked off by Ed's, kind of betrayal of his wedding vows, which by beating his wife, he kind of betrayed the promise he made to her. And so the thing at the center of this whole thing is this symbol of his promise and how that symbol is betrayed. And it's now been warped into this representative of death and destruction and horror. I think that's very profound to me.
Yeah, I love it.
So now we get to talk about Lord of the Rings more.
Yay.
As he reached for the ring, a flicker of verse slipped through his mind. Not Stephen Dobbins this time, but J.R.R. Tolkien, who had invented the hobbits Ralph had last thought of in Lois's cozy, picture-filled living room. It had been almost 30 years since he had read Tolkien's story of Frodo and Gandalf and Sauron, the Dark Lord, a story which contained a token very similar to this one, now that he thought about it. But the lines were momentarily as clear as the scissor blades had been only moments before. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. So it's a Dark Tower novel when Lord of the Rings is just directly referenced in the book.
Yeah. Quote, this is maybe the longest Lord of the Rings quote we've had so far. And it's like King was inviting me to make this comparison to the Hobbits all along. Yeah.
And of course, like it serves the point of playing up the importance of this ring, right? Like we're being told that this is a symbol, an object of great significance, because the whole reason they were sent down here is to get this thing. We don't really understand what it is or what it means yet, but by using the imagery of Tolkien to discuss it, he's automatically played up its importance.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very clever kind of shortcut, and King uses literary references as shortcuts constantly.
Yeah.
In fact, he's about to do it again here. So Ralph goes to pick up the ring and succeeds in doing so, but a copy is left behind. Same thing happens when Lois takes it, and Ralph, of course, interprets this through another book, as we just talked about. This is the 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins. a story in which basically a man takes off a hat and another hat is always there on top of his head. So I guess the question I have for you, Matt, is Ralph a well-read enough individual to be making all these literary references? Like, I didn't imagine Ralph, like, he occasionally reads like Westerns. We are to understand, but like, this is a thing I think King does sometimes. King is so well read. King has read everything, and he loves his entire lens of existence is through the copious amounts of stories he's read in his lifetime. And so he likes to imagine life through those lenses. And so he has his characters do it constantly. And there's a lot of characters I think that works very well for. And there's some that I kind of start to go, And I think Ralph is pushing up against that line here a little bit. I just don't know if this is like a literary enough guy to be constantly like, not just having read a lot of things, but having read so many things that his kind of lens on life is seen through the things he's read.
Yeah. I mean, I feel you. It's funny. I was thinking about this and I was like, maybe people back in the day just used to read a lot more because there wasn't, especially when Ralph was younger, like TV probably sucked. And
yeah.
I guess there was radio. Maybe people just read more, but like, I think the reality, I don't actually think maybe that's sort of true, but I think in the real world, some people are readers, some people aren't readers, like that's the way it tends to be is like either you read 10 books a year or you read 0 books a year, that's more what people tend to be like. And Ralph doesn't seem like the kind of guy who reads a lot. So maybe I'm being unfair. Like, obviously he does have all these literary references, so I'm like wrong. I'm just saying he doesn't seem like it.
It just seems like it's King speaking through the character rather than the character speaking, which like I get. And yeah, to be fair to Ralph, obviously he has read. We've seen him read. Like, he goes to the bookstore to pick up some Western, airport novels, and it's not like the things he was referencing are like super literary. We have Tolkien, we have the 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins, but I don't know. I just I think you have to consume a certain amount of material before like you really start seeing like the comparison to a thing you've read is the first thing that pops into your head.
I mean, I don't get a lot of the references that Ralph Roberts makes, so he reads more than I do. Let's put it that way.
Sure. That's a little rant of mine, but I mean, I love, like, don't get me wrong, I love that King does this. Like, it's so delightful. It constantly delights me the way he envisions encounters through the lens of other stories.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what the Dark Tower was all about, and
exactly.
I think you're kind of seeing that it's just a thing he does in all his books.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, so we get this line here, and I want to talk about this for a bit. The replicas were tokens which preserved the shape of Ka, just as spokes radiating out from a hub preserved the shape of a wheel. The original, however, Ralph thought the original was the hub, one ring to bind them.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a thing where I go, okay, that's a really neat idea, but what does it mean? Like, what does that actually mean in the context of the book?
I started out not having any clue, and then I decided that it's the first ring is the Keystone Earth ring, and all the other rings are just other levels of the tower rings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. That's my answer.
I like that. I like that a lot. I mean, there's multiple levels to it. Like, obviously the idea of you taking out the hub and Ka kind of adjusting things or making a copy to attempt to keep the wheel of Ka the same is meant to represent how hard it is to quote unquote change your Ka, which is again a new concept that was brought out in this novel. Like, it's like Ka is almost by definition self-correcting, and I think that kind of slots into your storytelling theory here, that like the story is going to be the story. You, a character living within the story, can't change it. If you try to, it's just gonna. It's kind of like Final Destination. You were supposed to die here, and so the story is going to warp itself to make sure you die.
But here, maybe Ralph is doing something along the lines of changing the story by
if you get down to the OG, right? If you get to the source of the story, if the ring is like the author's pen, then maybe you can finally change the story.
Yeah, and I mean, you could I guess I like all of that stuff you just said. I think that the connection I made in my mind was to the rose, where there's this one rose that matters vastly more than anything else. And it's like, okay, well, there's this one ring that matters vastly more than anything else.
Sure.
It matters so much that it has like interdimensional shadows that it's casting of itself that manifest as other rings, but he can tell the difference because he has magic powers.
Sure. I like that. All right, so the two make their way out of the storage area and back into Atropos' house proper, and it's here where the little shit finally catches up to them. He gets the jump on Lois, razor blade put to her lifeline, and it is here that we cliffhanger!
Yep. Damn you.
2 weeks in a row. Sorry, bud.
I guess this is what happens as you get toward the end.
That is true. True. We are only 2 weeks away from finishing this book.
So, I mean, I know that Mordred was Gollum, but is Atropos also Gollum? Because he's... Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, I mean, you were good, you were on a roll, and then you just took it one too far.
Yeah, right. No, this is bullshit, Matt. No, it's not Gollum. It had nothing to do with it anyway. Okay.
Yeah. So that is it for this week's reading. Oh my gosh, that was a lot of fun. Next week we will be reading. Oh, I forgot what the chapters were, and I don't have it written down like I normally do. Next week, I believe we have 4 chapters. It's the most chapters we've covered in 1 week. Chapters 26 through 29, which gets us pretty close to the end. It's awesome. Gonna be exciting.
Yeah, can't wait.
All right. So before we leave, we have to talk about Ka again, because our discussion question from last week was, what do you think about Ka? How have your feelings about Ka changed over the course of this podcast, over season 2 specifically? We got a lot of fun answers here, Matt. A lot of different answers. And I think that's the thing. That's one of my favorite things about Ka, is that like everyone has a slightly different read on it. So this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we couldn't settle on a question last week. So we just kind of threw this one out, and I was happy we did that because I liked reading these a lot.
Yeah. Maybe this will clarify some of my confusions when they say stuff like eating your Ka or whatever. All right.
I doubt it.
Emperor Fry the Solid says, Ka. Every day I lean more into Eddie Dean's personal definition, Kaka. Roland embraces Ka partly because he's emotionally stunted, right? And arguably because he's literally walked all these steps before. He senses there is a direction and inevitability of everything in his own life. But Roland's journey and Insomnia proves Ka can be changed, if only in little increments. So Ka is a wheel, a damn big one, and all we can do is put our shoulder to it. And as we know, sometimes it's the little nudges that make a big difference.
I like that.
I like that a lot. That's a really good metaphor because, like maybe you can steer it. Even if you steer it just a little bit, that could matter.
Yeah. It's like a snowball, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Baby, Can You Dig Your Sam says, we really should have an entire philosophy course dedicated to Ka. I agree. To me, Stephen King created this word to describe the ineffable force that propels his stories forward. His characters don't really have any choices. All of their decisions are actually the decision of the story weaver king. If the author writes himself into a corner, Ka can intervene. If something happens that doesn't make sense, it's Ka. Deus Ex Machina? It's Ka. But wait. By his own admission, King's stories are largely character-driven. He has an idea for a premise, some what-if scenario and themes, then he sets about creating his characters to put into those scenarios. And these aren't just two-dimensional characters. These characters have thorough backstories, past traumas, and relationships, and personal values. He puts them into situations and then sees how they react. And because his characters are humans to a fault, their actions are not always predictable, even to the person who is telling the story. Every decision a character makes has to feel authentic to the writer, and sometimes what you thought that character was going to do or where they were going to end up just doesn't feel authentic to the character you've grown to know. So the story evolves. And remember, this is King's specific experience of writing, so you just can't generalize this to all writers. Ka, to an extent, is part of the story that characters don't have agency in, or it at least describes the feelings of not having agency in their life, fate/destiny. But like an endless choose-your-own-adventure book, their story could take them many different places depending on their choices that feel authentic to the character in that specific moment of their journey. And if you ascribe to the quantum immortality theory, which embraces a multiverse, everyone exists in every level of the tower. When Roland reached the top of the tower and found himself back at the beginning holding the Horn of Eld, perhaps he stepped into another level of the tower and a new opportunity to make different choices on this level. So not back to the beginning, but onto another level.
Mm-hmm.
Holy shit. I love what Sam did here with the idea of, kind of the central contradiction of King's idea of Ka, right?
Mm-hmm.
That Ka is the forces of destiny on your characters, and to your metaphor, the forces of storytelling onto your characters. But Sam is right that the way King writes, his characters make the choices. His characters are more in control of the story than he is at times. So how do we combine that with our understanding of what Ka is?
Yeah, I guess something along the lines of the idea that whatever the character ends up doing, King is going to work with it and work it into the plot that he has ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
And thus that's the sense in which the characters ultimately might end up feeling powerless, even though, the character made a choice that Stephen King, the writer, didn't anticipate beforehand. As he's writing this sentence, he's like, no, they wouldn't do that. They would do this. And then,
Mm-hmm.
but then that's the thing. The wheel just keeps turning and he has to work it in. And,
yeah. And this idea that, regardless of Ralph Roberts' individual choices throughout this storytelling Ka, the reason he's in this story, the reason he got Insomnia, the reason he's been thrust into this thing and picked is because he's in a book.
Yeah.
And the book is controlling that on some level. So I think it still works. I think it is an interesting examination of the idea, though.
I mean, I think this just makes it richer. Like, I don't think this invalidates any of the ideas that we've really kind of discussed. I think it's a fun angle just to remind ourselves. I think maybe I could afford personally to remind myself of the fact that King is a pantser, a gardener, a writer who will let his characters make their own choices in ways that surprise him, and that has fun ramifications for what Ka is.
Sure.
All right. Pear Jane says, I feel like Matt's definition suits me best. What makes a good story is as good a definition as any for destiny or fate in the world of fiction. They're all puppets of Gan. They're all going to do whatever the storyteller tells them. So they're predestined. The interesting angle, though, is when we look at the process of writing. Stephen King feels as though he's essentially plugging into cosmic sources of stories, and the stories are flowing through him, not from him. I've often felt the same way when I'm really caught up in writing a story. I don't know how it will end or what the characters will say next, and sometimes I've gone back and read my work and seen clear threads and connections I hadn't intended. I can feel like there's a vast machinery under my conscious mind connecting all the lines and sending veiled messages up to the surface to the page. King has said he's as surprised as anyone by where his books have taken him. So if Ka is what makes a good story and the author is a god to the characters, then where does the author's power come from? Is creation an act of making subconscious connections conscious? Maybe that's why Ka is a wheel. It's a big water wheel where our subconscious sends messages up to the conscious mind. We see and use those messages, and then the wheel sends the messages back down so that they blend with other subconscious thoughts before they're sent right back up to the surface again. My God, I love that.
Want to know how I know Jane's a writer? that image that she just created.
Uh-huh. No, I really like this. And yeah, I've had a couple of instances of feeling like where is this story coming from? It's not me. I think that where the writer kind of sits at the crux of things is the writer's taste, to maybe put a word to it, is like the subconscious or the spiritual force of creation is flowing through you, but your taste in whether or not you are liking what is coming out of you dictates the course of that flow, I think.
Sure.
So it's not a direct control of that flow, but it's a sort of, again, like nudging the wheel one way or the other sort of direction. And
yeah,
I think it's really cool image though.
God, I love this shit. I love it so much. It's so fast. Like I could study the act of creation in storytelling is so weird and fascinating and powerful and unknowable in a lot of ways, and in some ways that's also very structured and formulaic, and like you're like, so sometimes we mystify creation too much when a lot of times it's just literally work. A lot of like it's work. Like King is doing work, but also it's this powerful, unknowable work at the same time. And it's this combination of these two things that create these art. And I'm endlessly fascinated by it.
Just to make it totally mechanistic, like, yes, Stephen King is quote unquote just working, but he has trained his subconscious and his mind so extremely well beyond what anyone else has, to the point where his subconscious can do things that our subconsciouses can't do. So that's where the magic comes from, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Complicated 9519 says, if I had to pick my favorite random pointless death, it would be from the anime. God damn it. Why do I always get the anime ones? From the anime, Another. I won't get into the plot because, as you know, it makes no sense. Thank you. But it is 1000% my favorite death. A girl trips and falls down the stairs, and the point of the umbrella she is carrying stabs right in her neck. Blood everywhere. And that's Ka, baby. Everything full circle. Umbrella, Debbie's blue umbrella, gone, a god, in 2 stories from across the world at similar times. It's a wheel for sure. Spins and spins and spins. Everything is everything, or something like that. To me, Ka is just Ka. If something goes right, it's Ka. If something goes bad, that's also Ka. I love the idea of Ka as destiny of sorts, but Insomnia makes it out that Ka can be tampered with by the right beings or the wrong ones in some crazy cases, and that confuses me a lot. You're not alone, Complicated. But I try not to think too hard on it and drive myself crazy. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, we've had this conversation, you and I, over the years about free will versus destiny versus determination versus blah 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 blah. We've had these conversations, and you could talk about this kind of stuff endlessly. You could talk about destiny. You could and there are people that look at everything that happens to them, good, bad, or neutral, and say that's fate or Ka or the power of the great storyteller in the sky to control my thing. And there are people that I think are more like me, that I'm just like, I don't want to think about that because it's too much for me. Yeah. It's too much for me to think of whether I actually have free will or not. It's too much. So I'm just going to keep just going through the day to day.
Yeah. If it makes you feel bad, don't do it. I have my beliefs, but I don't need to persuade anybody,
Yeah.
No, that's funny. I mean, yeah, I do, I've never actually thought of my actual beliefs about not having free will as being related to Ka, but it's kind of a fun connection. I also ponder that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're basically saying that Ka exists in our life.
And I mean, maybe this explains why I have 19 letters in my name. All right.
You're never gonna let that.
I've never got to mention that once every couple of
I just remember when you figured that out. I think you messaged me right away, and you were like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah, I was blown away. I was terrified too. Mm-hmm. All right, all 84001 says the Force Ka is what gives a Jedi Ka gunslinger his powers. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy beams together. According to Roland Deschain, apparently.
I don't think that's a quote.
It's close enough. They say, I always just kind of thought it was a mix of fatalism and karma. Your destiny is predetermined, but only because your actions made it so. What goes around comes around. Ka is a wheel. You get what you put out into the world. The love you take is equal to the love you make. Something vaguely new agey. The sort of thing you might read on a box of Nag Champa. After the final book came out, then I started to think Ka was just the characters remembering their prior loops. In meta terms, it's King's narrative get out of jail free card. Which isn't me diminishing the concept. On the contrary, it is incredibly clever. How many times does a character just know something? What I love about it, though, is King comes right out and confesses what he's doing to the actual characters in the story. Relax, here comes the Deus Ex Machina. I'm with Pear Jane. I too was struck with Matt's interpretation. Ka is a function of narrative and experienced by our characters as fate. In a story this concerned with its own telling, like The Dark Tower. That's a brilliant theory.
Yeah, I mean, not to give you a bigger head than you already have, but I think that's like one of the greatest things you've ever come up with, and I think it will forever change my understanding of this story. And I think everyone who loves The Dark Tower needs to know about this interpretation of yours, because it's truly brilliant.
That makes me happy. It's funny because I'm not protective of it. If somebody has a new wrinkle, like a few of these answers so far have have made me think like maybe I didn't have it quite right, or like there's certain aspects of it that you can expand upon. But I don't know. I think it's fun. I'm glad people are enjoying it.
Yeah. Lord of Chain says, I think Ka is the food the gods eat. After reading Insomnia for the first time a few years ago, I started looking at it this way, using the story as kind of a field guide. Strong emotions equal raw power, which the higher universe consumes. Quote from Salem's Lot. It conjured up an image of fate, not blind at all, but equipped with sentient 20/20 vision and intent on grinding helpless mortals between the great millstones of the universe to make some unknown bread. God, I love how he wrote in Salem's Lot. All things feed the beam equals the energy from all our emotions, conflict, and struggles feed into the beams which power the universe. Through this lens, one could look at Roland as some sort of dynamo, which starts the beginning of each cycle low on emotional energy and needing a priming, i.e. a quartet and a quest, before he starts firing on all cylinders. By the end of the last book, he has provided a whole range of tasty emotional fuel for the tower organ, and the cycle begins anew with him all used up again. Kind of like a dark Lovecraftian perspective, but fun to think about. Yeah, I like that lens a lot.
It's super messed up. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The idea of Roland as a dynamo that is just harvesting Ka energy. This reminds me of some other stories I've read where like the conceit is sort of like, the character's suffering is basically textually fuel for the enjoyment of the reader. That's very fun.
Yeah.
All right. Mick CQ says, I've come to see Ka as some sort of story-driven take on the Tao. They can't be explained fully. The characters have to surrender to it and trust that things find a way of happening. Events must be allowed to unfold, and almost paradoxically, if a character decides to intervene, then that's also Ka being allowed to unfold. Where I think it differs is that sometimes Ka seems to intervene in a way we would say is unnatural, which gives a greater sense of threat and conflict. I'm still fairly new to Stephen King books, and I'm hoping to see some development on Ka and the Tower as we go through the books.
Cool.
Yeah, I like that comparison to the it's pronounced the Tao, but it's spelled the Tao.
But that's a T, Matt.
That's a T, but it's not an English word. Is the other part though? Yeah, sure. It's basically just this sort of idea of like things will take their course no matter what you do because you're part of things. So yeah.
Steve D says, my take on Ka has been reshaped after thinking on recent conversations with the Little Bald Doctors. In my mind, Ka has always just been the story. The characters on the Dark Tower journey feel the pull of their destiny as King has written it. Now, the Little Bald Doctors are messing with my interpretation. Maybe when King changed his idea of what the Dark Tower saga would look like over the decades, Ka also changed. This change impacted characters and stories that initially did not have such a direct link to the Tower. Had he written the Dark Tower series all at once, that might not be the case. I think we'll go with that. Steve also says this is his first go through Insomnia. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah. Cool.
You know, this is one of those possible answers to our question of why Insomnia was a trap, right? I think a lot of people have pointed out that this book is shifting their understanding of what Ka is and how it works. And maybe it is a trap for Roland to think, yes, Ka can be changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting because I agree. This book is perturbing my neat little theory, which is fine. But that's a fun idea, yeah. Because I have this question in the back of my mind the whole time, like what is the trap? I still don't see the trap. I mean, I have a couple ideas, but none of them feel compelling. So that is interesting to me.
Sure.
Richard G says, great question. I think about this more often than I'd like to admit. I'd like to start by saying I've been playing the PS game Death Stranding at the moment.
PlayStation, Matt. Come on.
PlayStation game Death Stranding at the moment, wherein without giving too much away, the body is your Ha and your soul is your Ka. Just pricked my ears up and made me question whether there might have been a Dark Tower fan in the creation team. As for Ka in Stephen King's universe, I've started to see Ka as basically religion. Amazing things have happened in the name of religion, but you can't look past the horrors done in its name either. Roland is the perfect example of this. When the going is good, Ka is willing it. And when something messed up happens, but suits Roland, well, that's the will of Ka. Or something happens he doesn't like, he's shaking his fist at that goddamn Ka. Make up your mind, mate. To me, Ka is explaining the unexplainable, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's just Ka, baby.
Yeah, that's fun. I mean, I like, along the religion theme, this idea that I think we talked about this during the Dark Tower, but the idea that they're just the people of this world have prescribed this word to try to explain the things that they don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that doesn't quite jive with like the concept of Ka-Tet as like a tangible, like actual force that exists in this world. Like within the mythology of the Dark Tower, like a Ka-Tet is actually a unit that has magical, energy amongst themselves. But even that, you can just say, well, someone decided to call it a Ka-Tet. Like, it doesn't have to actually have anything to do with this word you've made up to explain things. You could just say, why do we have the ability to communicate psychically with each other? It's Ka, baby. Yeah. It's the Tet of Ka.
Uh-huh. It's kind of funny to think like there's no reason to believe that Ka is real. Yeah. Even like inside the story, it could just be a word that they made up to describe like a certain sort of fatalistic philosophy believed in by residents of Midworld.
Sure.
Like it kind of seems compelling that Ka exists based on the stories we read, but we don't actually know.
Sure. So where are we? Christopher L says, "Oh my, if it's Ka, it'll come like the wind and your plans will stand before it no more than a barn before a cyclone. Easily one of my favorite lines ever. Ka to me is fate, destiny, chance, the force, all rolled into one. It symbolized the never-ending battle between predestination and free will. I don't believe that you can withstand Ka, but your choices along the way of the path that it leads you can ultimately will determine your fate. It is the ebb and flow of life and the great unknown. Those who believe will roll with the changes. Those who fight it will get swallowed in the tides. Data chum, data chuck."
I mean, I like this concise framing as being, let me see the exact wording, the never-ending battle between predestination and free will, where it's to frame it in context of the storytelling ideas, it's the never-ending sort of conflict or maybe even dialectic between what the character authentically wants to do and where the story sort of needs to go. That's a fun idea too. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot.
Steve L says, Ka, the biggest big topic in the Dark Tower. Is it destiny? No matter what you try to do, you are bound by Ka and will end up where Ka, Are you bound by Ka and will end up where Ka wants you to go? Or is it all bullshit? Ka, just something we say to rationalize our lives and choices. I believe it's more of Ka presents us with things we are destined to experience, but it's up to us how we react to that situation. Roland's destiny was to have to choose between pursuing Martin or saving Jake. Roland chose wrong, and it came back to haunt him over and over throughout the series, and will continue until he chooses correctly.
Yeah, I like that framing because it sets it clear that Roland's biggest problem was he prescribed Ka to the choices he made incorrectly. Like if Ka is like, all right, I'm going to present you with two roads to take, and then he takes the bad one and then goes, well, that's Ka. It's like, no, that was you, buddy. That was you. I like that.
Yeah, like either choice would have been Ka. It's just this is the bad choice.
Yeah. Sigma says, the only thing that's changed about my understanding of Ka is your guys' inclusion of Ka as storytelling itself, an interpretation that went over my head when I first read it. It makes a lot of sense, but for some reason, it just didn't register with me. Beyond that, not much has changed. I got into other works about fate, such as Holic and Kafka on the Shore by Murakami, but my understanding of Ka has remained largely the same. Well, there you go, Matt. You had influence on people.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right. Shortstop 88 says, I didn't think too much of Ka when I first read the Dark Tower series. I was a middle/high schooler at the time, and I was basically just following through with whatever the narration said. This made things difficult whenever I read from the perspective of an unreliable narrator and wasn't supposed to side with them, Worm, and to a lesser extent, Pact. I'm glad I got to listen to this podcast because while I got that the series was about the importance of stories, such as when the events of Stephen King books being real in later parts of the series, But I didn't realize how much the series dived into storytelling, such as storyception in The Gunslinger and the stories being told taking up a majority of the book in Wizarding Glass and The Wind Through the Keyhole. Being able to hear the two of you constantly refer back to how much how much the series has to do with stories, I'd have to agree with Matt that about Ka being the path of the story, or what makes a good story. Sure, Ka is sometimes Ka in how it leads good people to sad endings, but those endings are part of what makes a good story.
Yeah. Look at all these people you've won over, Matt.
That's cool. I want to say here, now that we're at the end of the questions, like I feel like you and I developed this theory. Like maybe I was the first to articulate some particular point, but like this is kind of something we've been sharpening between us. So
sure.
I feel a little like I shouldn't take all the credit for it. Basically, is what I'm saying.
You take as much credit as you want, man. I don't care.
Okay, I'll take 87% of the credit.
All right, that seems like a fair amount of credit.
All right, good.
So that is it. Thank you again, everyone. That was a fun conversation. It's one of those like things that we could do a whole episode on just Ka itself, and I would still find new things to talk about. So we appreciate you all bringing new perspectives to it. That's what's so fun about these questions.
Yeah, that's I'm going to have a lot to chew on with all these answers. Appreciate it.
For sure. Moving on to next week's question. What is it, Matt?
Next week's question. What is your favorite evil villain lair and why?
Oh, I like this one a lot.
Yeah.
I say that as if I wasn't the one that came up with it.
Well, I also like this one a lot. And,
yeah.
I did not come up with it.
So many wonderful layers to choose. I think this was a combination of the tree and also watching a new James Bond movie this weekend has just evil villain layers in my head.
It's fun to think about. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Excited.
Yeah. So let us know your answer to that question, and we look forward to reading them next week. But that is going to do it for us. As I said, our next week, we are covering 4 chapters. It's about the same number of pages, but it's 4 chapters 26 through 29. So make sure you read all those 4 chapters and be ready to talk about them next week.
Yeah, remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And the subreddit r/doofmedia is a great place to read up on everybody's answers about Ka and have discussions about Ka, because
absolutely
we're a university of Ka.
We are. You're all getting your bachelor's in Ka studies.
That's right.
If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so and make sure you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts. I just did that part of the script with my eyes closed to see if I had it memorized, and I succeeded. So good job, me.
Yeah, and if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, then please consider donating to us on Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. I just did that with my eyes closed.
Nice.
Special thanks to new patrons. Got to read this part. Steve L., Johannes M., Dan T., and Spencer. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff we have over on the Patreon, and we really appreciate you.
Yeah, the 4 of you and everyone else should make sure you read those 6 Do the King Thing stories and vote on your favorites. Please do that. We're giving you ample time. We know it might take some time to read some of these stories, so I think we've given everyone 2 weeks to do that. So please give it a shot. Read those stories. I promise you they're fun. They're not that long.
Yeah.
And please vote on your favorite.
Yeah. By design, they're quite short. They don't take that long. Yeah.
Yeah. This thing has stakes. People, there's stakes involved. There's copies of books that are going to go to people.
Yeah.
So please take the time to do it. I know your fellow writers will very much appreciate your involvement.
For sure.
But if you are not one of those that has donated to us and cannot afford to do so right now, of course, that is absolutely okay. Downloading this podcast helps us out. Sharing this podcast helps us out. Please continue to do those things. It means so much to us when you do it. And of course, you can always help us by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. This week's Spotlight review comes from Ma Franklin 1977, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Loving things so far. I was way behind when it came to podcasts to begin with, and I'm just branching out to more of the news type podcasts. I'm in a Stephen King Facebook group, and this podcast was recommended to me. I am so happy they did. I've read Stephen King since 6th grade. I've read the Dark Tower series several times, books 1 through 4 several more times. It is so awesome to hear someone's opinion who is reading through the books for the first time. It is also interesting that Matt hasn't read very much of King's work, so he isn't jaded. I've only just started the 2nd episode, and I love it, and I can't wait to hear what's to come. well, Ma Franklin, it might be quite a while before you are listening to this particular episode, but thank you for that. And we really appreciate you taking the time to rate and review us. And that's true for all of you out there. We just hit 321 reviews, which for our little podcast is quite a lot. So thank you to everyone who's done that.
That is really amazing. And Ma Franklin is one of those unicorns who will leave a positive review after listening to 2 episodes of a podcast.
Do you ever sometimes I read those reviews and then I'm like, oh man, I wonder if they're going to come back in like a year and be like, so yeah, it started off strong, but then it really went to shit.
No, I don't, but now I will. Thank you. Appreciate that.
You're very welcome. You're welcome to my constant insecurity and imposter syndrome.
Great.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us. We will see you next week as we get closer and closer to the very end of Stephen King's Insomnia. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.